I am so excited to be here with Catherine Ramírez. And Kat, oh my goodness, we go back all the way to Berkeley days. And now you're, publishing all these amazing books. You have been. Welcome, Catherine.
Thank you for having me. And it's so nice to see you here and in this context.
So, Catherine, speaking of Berkeley, so we finished up around the same time, our bachelor's degrees. Then you went on and you actually had you had a stint at University of New Mexico, if I recall correctly, and you were on a Ford postdoc. You got your job at UCS Santa Cruz, where you've been. You started as assistant professor, worked all the way up. You're a professor there, and you have been publishing all these amazing books and really foundational works on Chicano, Chicanx, futurism. But what is the story that we don't know or that we can't see on a CV? How did Catherine Ramírez kind of get into, Chicanx, Latinx studies?
So rewind. I am a first generation college student. So my sisters and I have no brothers. My sisters and I were the first ones in our family to attend and graduate from college. And I am one of four sisters. I'm number two. And my older sister went to community college after she graduated from high school. And then she transferred to Berkeley. And this produced quite a bit of commotion in my household. This was in the, early mid 80s. And my parents were very reluctant to let her go. We lived about, 2 miles from Cal State LA. And, UCLA was on the other side of the city of Los Angeles. But it was still closer than Berkeley. And my parents figured, why can't our daughter just stay here in LA? Why does she have to go away to Berkeley? And I don't think they realized how difficult it was to get into Berkeley at the time. And, what Berkeley means to a lot of people. And after I think they heard a lot of people, including their parish priest, say, oh, wow, Berkeley, your daughter must be very bright, or your daughter must be very hardworking. Apparently she's a good student. Not everyone gets into Berkeley. They relented. And she arrived at Berkeley and she took Chicano Studies 50, Introduction to Chicano History. And I visited her. I took the Greyhound bus and I visited her in Berkeley, and I sat in on one of the lectures, and I resolved to attend Berkeley as well. I was very inspired by my sister. I'm excited. I also was attending a Catholic girls' school, and I was really struck by the fact that there were boys at Berkeley. I'll be totally honest with you. That was, one of my motives for being a good student was you can go to college and there are boys in college. I was that boy crazy when I was in the Catholic girls' high school. And I followed in my sister's footsteps, and I too went to Berkeley. And when I enrolled, she said, you must take Intro to Chicano History. I don't care what you major in, you need to take Intro to Chicano History. And I did. I ended up enrolling in the class that I had sat in on with her when I was visiting her when she was an undergraduate at Berkeley. And that class was definitely, it was formative. It was very influential. I had never ever taken, I knew nothing about Mexican American history. And I to be honest with you, I don't think I realized until I got to college that I was a minority. I grew up in a place where if you weren't Latinx, and we didn't call ourselves Latinx back then, we were just Mexican. And every once in a while, you met someone who was Salvadoran or Guatemalan, maybe Nicaraguense, but most of us were, of Mexican origin. If you weren't Mexican, then you were Asian, and the majority of the Asians were, Chinese, and then, some Japanese and Vietnamese and Korean and Filipino. But yeah, it wasn't until I got to college that I realized, like, oh wait, I am a minority in this country, a member of a minoritized group. Because numerically, where I came from, again, we weren't the minority, but when I got to college, I asked myself, well, why is it that like I had one Latinx teacher in all my year, K through 12. My geometry teacher when I was a sophomore in high school was Latina, and then I also had an academic advisor in my high school who was Latino. His name was Mr. Flores, and he was also very influential, and he encouraged me to apply to college. And most of the girls at my high school, most did not go off to college. If they went to college, they went to the local community college. Some attended Cal State. Some attended like a small private Catholic school, like Loyola Marymount in Los Angeles. But most of my classmates did not go to college and did not go, a few hundred miles away like I did.
Kat, I remember you already kind of blazing paths as an undergrad and, bringing this incredible energy that you have and your like brilliance. What was it? Was there something that, because we were both in English, you ended up going and doing a PhD in ethnic studies. What was it, what first got you into English? And then within English, like, was there something that happened where you're like, wow, I want to commit, I want to be one of those. I want to be a professor, but I want to be a Latina standing in front of all these kids.
So I knew when I was in high school that I wanted to be an English major. And if not English, I knew I wanted to do something in the humanities, like maybe philosophy. And at the time, I thought I wanted to be a journalist, but I knew that I wanted to write. And then in college, I was very, happy to study the King James Bible, for example, as literature. As someone who attended Catholic school for 12 years and who was instructed to study the Bible as the Word of God and not as literature. Studying the King James Bible as literature was actually very liberating for me. And also the King James Bible, like this was not the Catholic Bible. So right there, that was a lesson in, I guess, dialogism and, putting conversations in relation to each other. So I was content for the most part as an English major until the very end of my undergraduate career. And that's when I took an African-American women's lit course with Professor Barbara Christian. And that just blew my mind. And I was like, wait, there's this whole corpus of literature that I know nothing about. We read Anne Petrie's The Street. We read works by Toni Morrison. I was like, this is beautiful. And why is it that I'm just being introduced to these writings pretty much in my last year of college, if I recall correctly? I also took a couple classes with Professor Alfred Arteaga. And again, he arrived at Berkeley partway through our undergrad years. And he was also extremely influential. So he introduced me to Chicana poetry, and then to the writings of Mikhail Bakhtin. And he also showed, he and Barbara Christian showed me like I could be a professor too. But I think when I decided I wanted to be a professor, this was early on. I had to take a class. I think it wasn't Shakespeare, but it was, sort of like an early modern British lit class. And we were reading Shakespeare's sonnets. And the professor, this older white man named Alan Nelson, would have groups of us over at his house in the Berkeley Hills, and we would read the sonnets aloud. Sit in a circle in his living room, and he and his wife served wine and cheese and crackers. And I remember thinking that this is so grown up and elegant, and like, dang, like, look at all these books in this house. Like, I want to be a professor too. And his wife was a musicologist. And if I recall correctly, she studied, like, I guess, early modern music. So there were all these old instruments in their house was almost like a museum. And I remember being so impressed, like, is that a harpsichord? And I thought this was how all professors lived. And then I got to know Alfred and Barbara, and they were like, you should be a professor too. You don't just have to be an old white man who studies Shakespeare to be a professor. There are many ways to be a professor.
Wow, yeah, both of them changed both of our lives for good and forever. I know you went on, got your PhD in ethnic studies. Let me ask you, Kat, in 2009, you published your first single authored book, The Woman in the Zoot Suit. And so now we're going from, literature and the study of literature to, a book of like foundational book, actually, that was reprinted, along with articles that you've been publishing on queering the Zoot Suit, et cetera. A more, could we say cultural studies, ethnic studies, methodology approach?
Absolutely, yes. So The Woman in the Zoot Suit is a response to the absence of representations of Mexican-American women Zooters in Chicano cultural production. And I definitely am working in ethnic studies, women and gender studies, cultural history. But I think that what The Woman in the Zoot Suit shares in common with my second book, Assimilation, an Alternative History, is a concern with absence and like with what's missing. And I think that concern is, that's what we do in the humanities. And I think in many ways, that's what really distinguishes us humanities scholars from our colleagues in the social sciences, particularly the social scientists who are more empirical, whose work is more empirical. And I'm not dismissing that kind of scholarship. I think it's extremely valuable. My point is that it's also important to study that which has been rendered invisible, that which has been erased, that which can't be seen or measured, because there's significance in absence as well. And this is a lesson that, I learned as a humanities scholar, reading the work of Jacques Derrida, for example, and Judith Butler.
Wow, you've articulated, this sort of thing that I've been doing for so long in such a beautiful way. Thanks, Catherine. Tell me, before we get into your latest hot off the press book, Assimilation and Alternative History, you have I don't know if it was the water you were drinking, what was going on in the early 2000s, but seriously, you kind of created this body of work that has opened up and today is just on fire. Chicanx futurisms, Latinx speculative spaces and theories. Tell me how you got here, and were able to do this. And what's even more amazing for me in a way is that your career in terms of your scholarly output isn't just tied to this. Very often we hit on something early in our careers and we just keep running with it. But, you put it out there and, every once in a while you kind of tweak it and you blow us away with it. So tell us a little bit about this.
Well, thank you. So my work on Chicanx futurism or Chicana futurism, really it began as it was a distraction. It was a side project. And I've always, been a fan of science fiction, of speculative fiction more generally. And as I was struggling to finish my dissertation, I began reading the work of Octavia Butler, the acclaimed science fiction writer. And I had never read science fiction by and about Black women, by a Black woman, about Black women. And I was just blown away by it. And then I started reading about Afrofuturism. And I learned this term, Afrofuturism. I read just a lot of scholarship about Afrofuturism. And I noticed that I said, there's sort of a corollary happening in Chicanx cultural production. And I don't think we can call it Afrofuturism per se, but maybe I just need to come up with a term for it, a term that is clearly indebted to Afrofuturism. But that is, that I basically modified for another history, another discourse, another demographic, but not always a discrete demographic. There's definitely overlap. So Chicano futurism is simply cultural production that uses the tropes of speculative fiction to excavate and retell stories of about contact, colonialism, displacement, labor, migration, resistance, and social and cultural transformation in the Americas. And it questions the connections that have been forged among science, technology, and progress. It disrupts racist and sexist binaries that exclude Chicanx and Latinx from visions of the future. It interrogates who counts as human and what it means to be human. And above all, Chicano futurism defamiliarizes the familiar. And in doing so, it calls attention to that which tends to be taken for granted, like tradition or history, the norm, including normative sexuality and gender. And I think that Chicano futurism is defiantly and gloriously hybrid. And as such, it rejects these notions of purity. And it's often It often offers the perspective of and is a celebration of the underdog.
Wow. Thank you, Kat, for that beautiful paragraph that you just delivered on Latinx speculative spaces and creation. The assimilation apparatus, and this is something that, of course, is I'm referring to the work, your very, very recent and important work that I've just finished reading. It's right here somewhere. The Assimilation and Alternative History. So you're kind of turning things inside out here and actually speaking of defamiliarization, you're taking a concept that we've become so habituated to, the concept of assimilation, and you're turning it inside out to show us all sorts of things that are happening. Maybe, though, you would be best placed to tell us what we're going to see as you turn this stuff inside out.
So what I do in assimilation and alternative history is I begin by decoupling immigration and assimilation. So often in this country, when we talk about assimilation, we talk about it in relation to immigration. It's an outcome of immigration, not necessarily a good one, according to some people, or it's not happening quickly enough, according to others. One of the things that really got me thinking about this relationship between immigration and assimilation is the fact that, prior to the late 19th century, assimilation was associated with Native Americans and African Americans, and assimilation's conceptual precursor is civilization. And so there were these efforts to, civilize the Negro and civilize the Indian. In fact, in Native American history, there's this whole period known as the allotment and assimilation era. And this is the period that goes from around 1880 through the New Deal, World War II. Today, however, when we talk about assimilation, we rarely talk about Native Americans or African Americans. African Americans, by and large, are not considered immigrants, even though, one can be, an immigrant and be African American. For example, if one is from the Caribbean, let's say, or from Latin America. And so, one of the first things I do is I decouple immigration and assimilation, and I look at assimilation without immigration, and then I scrutinize the gap between assimilation and U.S. citizenship. And the fact here, I'm looking at the fact that there are some people who are extremely assimilated, acculturated. Who may not even realize that they technically are not Americans in that they are not U.S. citizens. There's this gap between being assimilated and, having citizenship. And we see this in a lot of the writings by young undocumented people since basically 2001. And so what I'm trying to do in this book is show how certain people who aren't immigrants or who aren't recognized as real or legitimate immigrants have been assimilated, and often as racialized and subordinate subjects. And ultimately what I'm showing here is that assimilation isn't only a result of immigration, it's also a consequence of indigenous dispossession, U.S. imperialism, slavery, and an immigration apparatus that produces illegality and permanent temporariness. And so that's, I'm looking at how these people who aren't necessarily associated with immigration and assimilation have in fact been assimilated. And I see assimilation as a relationship of power. And it's a relationship of power that blurs or paradoxically reinforces the boundary between unequal groups and between this so-called inside and the so-called outside.
Permanent temporariness, the precarity of that belonging, unbelonging citizenry, the desirable, right, the assimilable. I know that you've also, with some of your colleagues, including Juan Poblete, have put out this, or it's about to be released, I think, this book, Precarity and Belonging. You co-authored the chapter, but you also have your own chapter in there, Black No More. I'm wondering if you could say a few words about this project.
So Precarity and Belonging will be published by Rutgers University Press later this year. We expect it to come out in June of 2021. And it stems from a couple of collaborations that I was a part of at UC Santa Cruz when I directed what was then known as the Chicano Latino Research Center. The research center's name was changed to Research Center for the Americas, I think in 2019, maybe 2018. But when I was the director, it was still known as the Chicano Latino Research Center, the CLRC. And we convened a conference called Rethinking Migration in 2016. My co-PIs, who are my co-editors, so Silvana Falcon, Steve McKay, Juan Poblete, and Felicity Amaya Schaefer, and I, we won a grant from the Mellon Foundation for a Sawyer seminar. So this book project comes out of these of that Sawyer seminar, and then out of the 2016 conference, and it's a beast of sorts. There are, if I recall correctly, 21 contributors. So lots of chapters, 3 parts, many moving parts. But ultimately, we are looking at the mobility or the immobility, the precarity, so the heightened and persistent condition or state of vulnerability and risk that so many people live with, insecurity. We're looking at the mobility, the immobility, the precarity of both citizens and non-citizens. And so often, when people talk about mobility, they talk about it in terms of either movement across borders, for example, or along socioeconomic lines. We're talking about both in this volume. Likewise, when people talk about precarity, they can talk about it in terms of like immigration, the fact that undocumented immigrants in particular, they are very much a part of what the economist Guy Standing calls the precariat, the people whose lives are very much defined by precarity. But then so are the nominal citizens who are stuck with stagnating wages, struggling to get by without health insurance, who then end up being seduced by right-wing populism, for example, and turning on the immigrants who are often in a very similar position. And so what we're trying to show with precarity and belonging is this politics of commonality, of common struggle.
Wow, politics of common struggle, commonality. Kat, as always, even when I was an undergrad, I was always learning from you. I'm learning so much right now. Here we are, we're Kat Ramírez in the classroom. Tell me, do you have a sort of a trademark or a thing that you're known for or that you do? Yeah.
That's a really great question right now, because I feel like, I mean, my teaching is in flux right now. This is how I teach. I sit down in front of a laptop and I try to look at that green light, the top center of the screen. I will say that being forced, by our ongoing public health crisis into the virtual classroom has given me the opportunity to rethink my teaching. It forced me to shift gears and rethink a number of my classes, develop new ones that are better suited, to the virtual classroom. I don't know what my trademark is right now. I think I'm in the process of rebuilding it. I mentioned to you earlier this morning that I am teaching a class for the first time this spring at UC Santa Cruz that will be fully online. So at UC Santa Cruz, we make a distinction between remote and online. So remote is a class that should happen in person, but it's happening remotely because of the circumstances, because of the pandemic. Online is a class that has been developed specifically for the online setting, like from the get-go. And so I am going to be teaching a brand new class on Chicana futurism online, 100%. And so developing this new class is really, it's giving me the opportunity to think, like, what do I want to say? Like, what's the takeaway? Like, what is, like, when I teach a class on Latinx assimilation as well. It's a literature class, but the focus is Latinx assimilation. And I tell myself, well, if there's one idea that I want my students to take away at the end of the quarter, it's that assimilation is a relationship of power. Period. Assimilation is a relationship of power. Like, there are many ways to unpack that, but that's just where I want them to start. Right now, I'm trying to think of, like, what's the big takeaway that I want my Chicana futurism, my online Chicana futurism class to offer. And again, I don't want it to be reductive, like, this is all 10 weeks in 5 words. I'm beginning to think in terms of, like, these kind of big ideas, and even the way I've organized the class, I've got this component on labor, and then I've got a component on futurity, just ideas about the future. I have a whole component on contagion as well, on plague and viruses and blood and mestizaje. And so, it's congealing, it's gestating. But I'm figuring it out. And in that sense, this pandemic this is one silver lining, like, first I was like, oh my God, I have to, like, revise my teaching. And I thought, well, actually, maybe it's time to freshen up my teaching. It needs kind of like airing out a house, opening the windows, letting some fresh air in. And this crisis has forced me to do that with my teaching.
Yeah, that's really great. It got me thinking a little bit about the journey as a kind of, actually, maybe a story that we're telling, if we think of the semester or the quarter as our story, with a launch, a catalyst kind of material that we struggle with, and then our resolution, right? And kind of what we learn from it. And technologies, new technologies, online technologies, of course, will influence the way we shape that journey, that story, right?
Absolutely. I mean, this is what you're doing with this as well, with this platform, I mean.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Another silver lining. So, Kat, putting you on the spot here, For just a second, where do you see, of course, I know you see it everywhere, the vitality in Latinx culture making and our critical engaging of that as scholars, as critical makers. But, what comes to mind to you? What do you feel really impassioned by today?
So in terms of Latinx culture making, just in general, I get really excited by the work of young, undocumented writers. I'm thinking, for example, of Javier Zamora, Yosimar Reyes. I think Yosimar Reyes is just one of the most just smartest, most compelling voices in Latinx culture making right now. I'm also I'm excited about some podcasts. I listen to these two young men, Latinos Who Lunch. I don't know if you've ever listened to them.
Mm-hmm.
They are so smart and so funny.
The Comidas y Cuentos, is that right? Or am I thinking of something else? But yeah,
I think that's
know.
different. But
yeah, okay.
Favi Fav and Favelito are their aliases. Justin Favela is Favi Fav.
Okay.
Babelito is actually an art historian. Emmanuel, I cannot remember his last name right now. I cannot remember it. They their launch pad is always, oh, what did you have for lunch today? And then they just riff from there. And they are just funny, smart, acerbic queens. And they really, I feel like I'm listening to friends when I listen to them. Now, in terms of the field and the state of the field of Latinx studies, and I think some of the exciting directions that we're moving in, I think that Central American studies is an increasingly important area of Latinx studies. And I think it is, really dynamic and exciting. I'm thinking specifically of work by Claudia Milian, Kenzie Cornejo, one of my own graduate students, Mauricio Ramírez, who is writing a dissertation about the Central American Mission District. I think that critical Latinx indigeneities is also another really vibrant path within Latinx studies. Latinx studies beyond the Americas. We can talk a lot about that transnational turn that happened in the 90s and hemispheric approaches. I think what's happening now is I think that the field it's matured, and that we have a lot to share with people in other places in the world, particularly conversations about borders and migration and assimilation, or what's often called integration in other parts of the world. I think that we have a lot to learn from our counterparts in other places, but I think we have a lot to offer as well, within, from Latinx studies. And so, yeah, these are some of the directions that I'd like to see us move in more. And I think that these areas will continue to be developed by some of the sharpest and most innovative scholars in our field.
Wow. Thank you for taking me on this incredible journey, Catherine.
Well, thanks Ramírez. For inviting me.
It really has been a pleasure. And my brain is like going crazy. My cerebro, I've got to do something now, because you've got everything, all the synapses are popping right now. So thanks, Catherine. Thanks.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This is a lot of fun.
Okay.